evening. It is a tremendous, tremendous pleasure for me to be here tonight, and I want to thank Mira for the excellent organizing of this talk this evening, and also to thank the Foundation for the invitation. I'm very excited about this talk. I think it's a good time in multiple sclerosis, and it's a very exciting time. So I wanted to share with you some of the excitement that we have in the world of MS. So this is a picture from the National Multiple Sclerosis Foundation or Society in the United States. And what it is telling you is that when people unite and they come together, they are more powerful. And this is happening all over the world right now. I'm going to share a little bit about the history of multiple sclerosis. Multiple sclerosis is not a new disease. It is an ancient disease. And one of the first doctors to actually write about MS was an Arab physician living in Spain, Ibn Rushd. He lived in 1100. And he wrote about people that he was seeing who had inflammation of the optic nerve, which is the nerve behind the back of the eye. We now call that optic neuritis. And he wrote about this inflammation in the back of the eye with weakness of the arms or the legs, and also numbness and tingling or paresthesias. And when we read his writing today, we can see that these patients have multiple sclerosis. So this is an old disease. What we know about multiple sclerosis today is that it's a genetic predisposition, so patients have a certain gene or genetic susceptibility to the disease. And then the immune system, which is generally used to fight disease, attacks the brain and the spinal cord. So the immune system gets very, very active, and it doesn't know how to turn itself off. And so it attacks the brain and it attacks the spinal cord. We know that MS is the most common cause of disability in young people today, other than trauma. So if you take away trauma, car accidents, and damage to the nervous system, multiple sclerosis is one of the most common causes of disability. We know that in the United States, there are up to 350,000 people who suffer from MS, and we estimate that globally it's about 2.3 million people. We know that in general, women are more affected than men. And we don't know if this is because of hormones. We believe it's because of hormones, but for every 1/3 of men who are affected, there are 2/3 women who are affected. As I said, it's a young disease, and as such, it pulls people out of the workforce. So it is an expensive disease. It's expensive for patients. Patients have to pay for lifelong therapy. They have to pay for physical therapy. They have to pay for many different and other things that accompany the disease. And so it's expensive for patients, it's expensive for families, it's expensive for insurance companies, and also for governments who are paying for health care. So the estimates are that in the United States, the cost of this condition runs into the billions of dollars. So what do we know about MS? So if you look at this map up here, you'll see that in North America and Northern Europe, there are many more people with MS. And you look here at the rest of the world, and there's really nothing. And so the question is there nothing here because the disease is not there? Or is it because we haven't looked at whether the disease is there or not? And so there's a lot of opportunity to look in the rest of the world for people who have MS. And so there's a lot of that data, scientific data, that is missing. And so we call that prevalence. So prevalence is how many people have a disease in a population. And so if you take the whole population and then you count the number of the people with disease, that is what we define as prevalence. So what do we know about MS in the Arab world? So in the MENA region, we don't know too much. There have been several studies done here, and an excellent review by Haidapour, who is working out of Iran. He looked at all of the studies that had been done, looking at how many people with MS are in different countries. And he calculated that the prevalence in the MENA region is 51 people per 100,000. So that's a prevalence of 51 per 100,000. So if you compare that to Canada and the United States, it's much, much less if you look at those numbers back to back. And then just to take you way back, the prevalence of diabetes in the UAE is 15,000. Okay, so many, many more people have diabetes in the UAE than have MS. So I arrived here in 2010. I was only supposed to come for 1 year, but I loved it here. My husband loved it here, so we stayed. And 6 years later, I'm still working with MS in the UAE. But one of my first questions when I arrived in Abu Dhabi was, how many people in Abu Dhabi have MS? And we don't know the answer to that question. All we had was one study that was done at Rashid Hospital between 2000 and 2007. So this was the only report of MS in the UAE, was this report done at only one hospital, only Rashid Hospital in Dubai. And what that study showed was that they had 158 patients who were Emirati nationals, and they had 126 patients who were expatriates. So that's not such a large number, 284, right? But how many patients were in the rest of the Emirates? How many patients were in Abu Dhabi? We didn't know. So our big question was to try and determine that number so that we could get the data. You know, once you have the data, you can get more information and you can start to build more research and find more resources for people with MS. So we got approval from Tawam, SKMC, Mafraq, and Al Ain, which are the four largest government hospitals in Abu Dhabi. So we looked at all of the patients who came in between 2010 and 2014. So Abu Dhabi gave, the system in Abu Dhabi made it very easy for me. So they have a well-connected computer system. So all of the computers in these hospitals are connected, and all of the MRIs are connected, all of the lab work is connected, and so it made it very easy to get an idea of how many patients are being seen at these hospitals. And so what we found was that there were 318 Emirati nationals and 192 expatriates for a total of 510 patients. But I think that number is a little bit low. And the reason I think it's low is because expats who are from other countries often don't go to these large hospitals. So the expatriates usually often go to private hospitals. And so I think that this number here is probably higher. And so when we looked at these numbers and then we looked at the statistical data of the population in Abu Dhabi, we were able to calculate a prevalence rate. And so we got a total prevalence rate of 18 out of 100,000. But then if you look at the local population here, it's higher. It's much higher. It's 56 per 100,000. And this was almost identical to the prevalence rate in Dubai. And so that's a good thing. It means that the data is consistent, and it means that it's more likely that the data is going to be accurate. But this is what I thought was the exciting part. So this is a little bit of a confusing chart. I'm going to tell you what it is. So on this axis here, this is the prevalence, okay, per 100,000. So this is 200 people per 100,000. And then we divided all of the patients into different age groups. So here, 0 to 14, 15 to 24, 25 to 34, and so on. So we divided the patients up by age group to see how many patients within each age group there were. And so we took all the patients, we divided them by age. And then what we did was we took out all of the people, all of the Emirati nationals who were under the age of 20. So this is a number that I found very surprising. 1/2 of all Emiratis in Abu Dhabi are under the age of 20. That's huge. That's huge. 1/2 of all the Emiratis in Abu Dhabi are under the age of 20. If you compare that to the United States, in the United States we have an older population. So most of the people in the United States are older and getting older. But here in this country, it's the exact opposite. Most of the people in Abu Dhabi are young people. So if you take out half of those, you take out all those babies and you take out all of those children, and you're left with the adult Emirati population, the numbers look very different, right? So if you're just looking at the adult population, you're getting much higher prevalence rates. So 152, 198, 149. This is in women. The red is women, and blue is our males, our men. And so if you look at these numbers are the same as in the United States. So if you can sort of jump to the next conclusion, and you can realize that it's very possible and very likely that the prevalence rate of multiple sclerosis in Abu Dhabi is the same as in the United States. And so do you remember when I showed you that map of the world and the US was dark? I mean, I think that as more data comes up, I think that that dark blue is going to spread across the globe. And I think it's because there's a lack of data, and there's a lack of what we call age standardized data. So I was very lucky in Abu Dhabi. Abu Dhabi has an excellent statistics center. The statistics center of Abu Dhabi has very, very good data on the patients, on people, and on the age of people, the demographics of people. And so not all countries have that. And in fact, the study that I showed you on the second or third slide, where he looked at all of the countries in the MENA region, only 7 out of 52 countries standardized by age. So I think that we need a lot more information from each country as to what is the age group of the and the demographic of each country, because I think as that data comes out, I think that we will probably find that the prevalence of MS is relatively the same across the world. That's my personal opinion. So I was very excited to find this. I thought that it gave us a lot of information on getting an accurate idea of how many people here have MS compared to Northern Europe and America. So just very briefly, we also looked at the types of multiple sclerosis. So are the characteristics of MS here, are they the same as in North America and Europe? And we found that they were the same. That the characteristics of people here were very similar to the West. And so you'll see here we have the most common type of multiple sclerosis. So there are 4 different types of MS. Relapsing remitting, RRMS, is the most common type in the West, and we found in our study that it was the most common type here as well. And then CIS is called clinically isolated syndrome. That is a person who has had only one attack and then no more. And so that was our second highest. And then the progressive MS and primary progressive MS were much smaller. So that is the same as in North America and Northern Europe. Our presenting symptoms, these are symptoms, what did people come to the doctor with? What was their first complaint? Was it an eye problem? Was it double vision? Was it weakness? Was it sensory disturbances? And our most common presenting symptom was visual. So either double vision, where you couldn't quite see the same image, or loss of vision in one eye, what we call optic neuritis. And then on family history, it was identical. So the Emirati nationals had about a 12% history of multiple sclerosis in a family member. And this is the same as in North America, basically, falls within the same range. So the MS that we see here is basically the same as the MS that we see in North America. So this is an important slide. So I was very happy when I got here to find out that we can get almost every medicine here for our patients. And I think coming from the United States, sometimes there's this impression that you don't have it as good over there as you do over here, and that people don't have a lot of access. But I was very happy to find that I was able to get almost every medicine here for MS. And so we looked at the different medicines that people are being treated with. And I want to just quickly say that Aubagio and Tecfidera, when this study was finished, we finished in December of 2014. And these 2 medicines had just come on the market. So I think by now these numbers would be higher for these 2. But what is most important to me is this piece of the graph right here, right? So 25% of the people who have MS in Abu Dhabi were not getting treatment. And so that I think is something that we can improve upon. And as most of you know, getting treatment early is important. It's important for the long-term progression of the disease, and it's important to get people active in their care. Some of these people are probably breastfeeding or pregnant. And so if you're breastfeeding or pregnant, we don't recommend that you be on treatment. But I don't think that they're all those patients. So that is somewhere that shows us that there is room for improvement. So what are some of the obstacles in this region that I have found in treating people here? So I think that there are some obstacles. And one of the reasons that I was so excited about this forum tonight is because I think that this is one of the first steps that we can step toward breaking down those obstacles to care. So one of the things in this region, and it's not only this region, I also found when I was in Malaysia, I found Malaysia and Africa have the same issues with that, is that people are ashamed of what they have. They're ashamed of it, they don't want to share, they are embarrassed. And I think when people are looking to get married or to find a partner or to start a job, to start a career or to go to school, they are ashamed of having this disease. And this is one of the biggest things that I think that we need to overcome, because there is no shame in having something. I think it's your attitude is the important part. So that can change. Isolation, many people feel like they are the only ones. And because MS is not as common as diabetes, people think, well, I don't know anybody else with MS. I feel I'm all alone. You know, if you have diabetes in this country, you feel pretty comfortable because it seems like a lot of people here have diabetes or high blood pressure. But when you have a disease like MS, unless you are able to connect with other people, you feel very isolated and you feel very alone. And this is a big one for me. So there is not a lot of access to reliable and accurate information about this condition. And so the first thing that people do when they leave my office or when they leave any doctor's office, when the words multiple sclerosis are mentioned, the first thing people do is they go home and they Google. And it's a horrible experience. It's a horrible experience for me when I look at the internet and I see what is out there with Google. There's a lot of wrong information out there, and there's a lot of information there that is a result of the last 50 years. And I think it's important to know that for the last 50 years, or not the last 15, but before that, we had nothing to treat MS. And so I always ask my patients not to Google because it's not a good way to educate yourself. And so what do I tell them to do? I ask them to go to reputable websites and places where they can get accurate information. So I do think that we are making tremendous steps forward with identifying these problems and with this becoming a more socially acceptable condition. And one of our wonderful speakers is here today. So Maha is here today, and she has started giving talks to the community to educate people about this condition. In Al Ain, we have the UAE MS support group, which gets people together and unites people and helps to share experiences. And then we have also social media sites that I think are also a step forward. So these are all sort of isolated efforts to move forward. And I think the strength comes from uniting people across the country. I think when you have unity, when people unite, they become powerful. They become more powerful. And that is one of the hopes in coming here tonight, is that I really feel that people become powerful when they unite. And I think that these numbers here can be much, much higher. So what are the needs that I've identified for patients in the UAE? I think we need informational brochures in Arabic. So I go home every every year to Johns Hopkins, and I ask for resources to give to my patients, and the resources are always in English. And most of my patients are Arabic speakers, and it's very, very hard for me to get brochures in Arabic which describe the disease and talk about the treatments and the resources in Arabic. So that's a big challenge. I think that we need to establish a national database for MS in this country. So my study was in Abu Dhabi, and there was a study done in Dubai, but there are other Emirates here, and there are other patients in other Emirates, and I think if we could get a national database, it would give us a much better idea of the actual numbers here. Establishing multidisciplinary MS health centers is important, and also to attempt to provide treatment for people who cannot afford treatment. And then finally, my most important message is, to let patients know that they are powerful. And so I want to give you an example of that very quickly. So this is an example of how one person, two people, can change the course of a disease. So Sylvia Lowry and her brother Bernard, she was born in 1915. She did not have MS, but her brother did. She was in law school. She was studying to be a lawyer when her brother developed this disease. And her family had money, so they could afford very good health care, but they could not find a cure, and they wanted to know if there was a cure for this disease. So she put, in 1945, she put a notice in the newspaper saying, if anybody has a cure for this disease, please contact us. And she got a lot of responses. She got 54 responses. And every response was saying, I don't have a cure, but if you find one, tell me. So there was a need. She identified a need that people had for this disease. So what did she do? She started in 1946. She started the National Multiple Sclerosis Society in the United States. And in 1947, 1 year later, they had raised enough money, and they gave their 3 first research grants, so money to people who were doing research in multiple sclerosis. By 1967, the society had gotten so large and so wealthy because of patients generating money and raising money that they discovered that 1/3 of the money that they had was going to international researchers. So they started the Multiple Sclerosis International Federation. So since 1946 until today, this foundation, this society, the National MS Society, has invested $870 million into MS. And every single medicine that we have today is either directly or indirectly a result of this money and this research. So this one woman and her brother were able to change the course of this disease and to change the entire treatment for the disease. That's quite remarkable. They also recruited more than 900 new MS researchers. So I'm one of that 900. I was a neurologist. I finished my neurology training, and I wanted to study only MS. I said, I only want to do MS. So I put together a research proposal. I submitted it to the National MS Society, and they gave me 2 years at Johns Hopkins, a 2-year fellowship to study only MS. So there are many doctors now and many researchers, MD doctors, and also PhDs, scientists who are working in the lab, who are funded by the National MS Society. They have grown so powerful in the United States now that they actually set the standards for the diagnosis for the disease. They set the tone as to what areas are we going to strengthen, whether it's rehabilitation, alternative medicine, stem cell research, and their research has contributed to all of the medicines today. So this is my favorite slide, right? So for over 1,000 years, we had nothing to treat this condition, nothing. Since 1993, every 2 to 4 years, we have a new treatment coming out. So I find this slide to be extremely exciting. 93, 96. Since I've been in the UAE, I moved in 2010, we've had 4 new treatments come in. So this is, the world is exploding, the world of MS is exploding now. It is very, very exciting, and there's a lot happening. And so what are the current goals now? We have more treatments coming. There are many more treatments in the pipeline to come out. And the goals now are to find ways to stop all activity of the disease, finding ways to repair the damage that has already been done, and to end the disease forever. Khalas. That's the goal. So that's the goal of the National MS Society now. And I think it's a very exciting goal. I really feel, I think everybody who works in this field is very excited about the advances that have been happening. And I just wanted to show you how much power patients have, how much power to make change, how much power to find treatment, and most of all, how much power to, to find a cure. So that is my message today. All right, so thank you very much.
Assalamu alaikum, Your Highnesses, members of the Foundation, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for having me here today. And thank you for allowing me to be a contribution to this incredible cause. It's so nice to see so many faces. I've put together a series of thoughts that I would like to share with everyone today. I really hope you guys find them as exciting as I do. I had my first encounter with the MS when I was 17 years old. So I woke up one day and I realized that I couldn't see out of my right eye. I honestly can't remember if this was something that happened gradually or if this was something that just happened. All I know is that I woke up one day and I couldn't see. Now, as you can imagine, it shook everybody in the house. We ran to the hospital, and I saw a bunch of doctors and ran a series of tests, but I actually didn't get diagnosed with MS at the time because I didn't show any signs of MS in my scans. I was started on the medication, the same medication that MS patients are started on, and I was told that it was a one-off incident, and I was told to wait. A couple of weeks later, I started losing my sight in my left eye, and in a month or so, I was completely blind in both eyes. So I had to put off my plans to finish education, to go to university. I don't know if anyone in this room has ever told a 17-year-old that they can't do something they want to do, but as you can imagine, it was not a fun experience for anybody in the house. My entire family, who have been incredibly supportive throughout this time, we all stuck together and just waited for it to go away. It took about 10, 11 months for my eyesight to come back. And I didn't even recover my vision completely. So I'm never going to have 20/20 vision, which I'm actually okay with because I used to be blind and now I have sight. I can't really see colors too clearly, but I was told that I could just go off, live a normal life, learn to drive, read, do whatever I wanted. And so I went off to university, I did my degrees, and then I moved to the UAE, where I was born, to start my first job. When I started my first job, it was September. I was excited, I was full of life, and in February, I had my second encounter with the MS, and actually, this is what I call the formal introduction, because that was actually when I started showing signs in my scans. So I woke up one day, and I was completely paralyzed in the right side of my body. I couldn't move. When I walked, I couldn't move my right leg. I had to drag it. I couldn't write, couldn't type normally. When I smiled, only half my face smiled, which was weird. And I didn't really know what to expect. So the same panic from when I was 17 happened again. I flew back to Bahrain to be with my family, and I was started on the medication again. Now here, when I started showing signs of MS, I was told that this is your diagnosis, this is what you have to do. Here are your injections that you will be on for the rest of your life. But I was never really informed of what this means. So what is MS? What are those drugs? Why do I have to be on injections for the rest of my life? I didn't really get any questions. And on top of that, I was feeling really unwell. I was very uncoordinated. I was really wobbly when I walked. I was severely depressed, and I would cry to my mother all the time. But eventually, when I recovered motor function again, I came back to the UAE. I started my job up again. And I just did, as the doctor said, I did what a normal person would do. I went online, and I sat on Google, and I was like, let me take control. What is multiple sclerosis? And after a couple of hours of research, I basically came to the conclusion that I was going to die, because that's what Google tells you. And so it added to how I was feeling, and I basically just went through the motions for the initial couple of years of my diagnosis because I didn't know what to do. One day, I was in the UK, on holiday, and I happened to see the National MS Society in the UK. And I didn't really know what an MS Society was or what they would be doing in there, but I thought, let me go in, let me see. I was suddenly exposed to this incredible world of people who were so positive and people who understood how I was feeling and who had solutions to the problems that I had and who had so much information. And before that point, I'd never come across something this amazing. I came back home with this many brochures that I still have at home today, and I started just reading. Now, I've been living with the MS for about 6 years. It hasn't been a long journey. It hasn't been an easy journey. It's been a very long journey, but I will say to you all that I've learned that by making changes to your lifestyle, you can actually live with the MS somehow quite happily. Now, there's so much to be said about the incredible medical research that's being done to date. I am actually on medication. I don't think I will ever stop. But I think that there are elements that we can incorporate in our everyday life that will make living with the MS easier. So there are 5 sort of main elements that I'd like to discuss with everyone today. And I really hope that it helps people out there. And that's what I try to do with the initiative that I started in Dubai, MS Talks. The first one, the first element, and I'm really sorry to start with the N word, but it's nutrition. Now, at the time of my diagnosis, I was 23, I was young, I was eating takeout, I was living on a diet of lasagna and burgers, I was feeling really unwell, so I just ate badly as well to make myself feel better. And I didn't understand why I was feeling so unwell because I was on the medication and it just didn't seem to make sense. I started reading and I learned that what MS is that it's an inflammation. And there are actually foods that have anti-inflammatory substances that can help you fight this inflammation. Now, this is something that exists in avocado, salmon, a lot of seafood. What I also learned is that you're supposed to eat things that are really rich in antioxidants. So the right kind of fruits can help you do that. And so I started slowly incorporating these things into my diet. Now, what I also learned is that there are foods that are not good for MS. That is things like certain types of grains, gluten, so bread, unfortunately, red meat, which to me was unbelievable because I had lived 25 years eating this food, and I was like, there's no way I can live this life without this food. But actually, I learned that you can, because really, it takes 2 weeks for a habit to form. And I'm not going to say that the change was instantaneous, because it took me a month or 2 to really start feeling the change, but I started suddenly feeling better because I was eating better and I was eating food that would help me live with the MS. I really encourage each patient out there to take the time to understand what types of foods can help with the MS and to learn what works for their condition, not the condition of MS, not the textbook definition, because the thing about MS is that each patient is so unique and each patient will have certain things that will work for them. So try different things and see what works for you as the MS patient, because it's your condition that you need to deal with. The second element that I'd like to discuss with everyone today is stress. Now, I can't stress this enough, but stress is not good for anyone. And it is particularly not good for MS patients because it literally gets on your nerves. So when I look back at the past 6 years that I've been living with MS, every time I've had an attack, it's been at a period of severe stress in my life. When I was 17, it was when I was doing my exams at high school. At the time, I thought this was the biggest deal in the world, and I was so stressed, and I had my attack. When I was 23, it was when I had started working for the first time, and I really wanted to prove myself, and I thought it was the most stressful thing in the world at that time, and I had an attack. When I was 25, it was when I had a really big project at work, and I really wanted to prove myself. At that point in my life, I thought that was the most stressful thing in the world, and then I had an attack. So what I've learned is that you need to let go of things that add stress to your life. You don't need it. You really don't, and it is not good for your nerves. The third element that I need to discuss with everyone today, and I know it's ironic because we're in May, but that's heat. So from what I know, and I know there's a lot of research to back this up, is that heat doesn't trigger a new attack, but it does cause effects of previous attacks to come back. Now, we're lucky and unlucky at the same time because we live in a part of the world where we can't avoid the sun, we can't avoid the summer, it's out there, we all know it. But I actually think that we are lucky because we live at a time where there's so much we can do to avoid the heat. You know, we can stay indoors, we can stay air conditioned, we can drink water so that obviously we stay hydrated. And one thing I learned is avoid the beach at all costs. It's okay if no one gets a tan this year. What matters is your health, and heat, it triggers your health in a negative way. The fourth point that I'd like to discuss with everyone today is exercise, exercise, exercise. Now, the thing about being diagnosed with something like MS is that you also get hit by horrific waves of fatigue. And you wake up in the morning and you just don't have the energy to do anything. One thing that I learned, and from what I've been reading and what I've been trying to do for the past 6 years, is that the right types of exercise can actually help you live with the MS and can make your core muscles stronger. So that's what MS patients need to be doing. They need to be strengthening their muscles and making their core muscles stronger. And the idea here, from what I understand it, is that when your nerves fail to carry you, your muscles can hold your limbs and can hold you up. So finding the right type of exercise can not only help give you more energy, it can strengthen you in a way that makes you feel stronger, and it literally holds you up when your nerves cannot. The last point that I'd like to discuss is the importance of vitamin D. Now, this is a little bit ironic because you get vitamin D from the sun, but we can't be in the sun because we can't be in the heat. But actually, there are certain types of foods that we can eat that will provide us with the right levels of vitamin D. And there are supplements that we can take every day that can help us maintain a level of vitamin D that will help the MS. And that's very important because when I asked for the results of all the tests that I've done over the years, I actually had low vitamin D at all the times that I've had an attack. So there could be a link, I believe. Now, I'd like to close with two messages. The first message is to the MS patients who have attended this today and who are listening to me today. MS is a very real condition. And the hard thing about it is that it's so difficult to understand what does it mean for me and what do I have to do? And there is no one-size-fits-all solution. But what you need to do as an MS patient is take the time to understand what is it that you have? What is it that triggers your body in a negative or in a positive way? What is it that supports the MS? What is it that makes it worse? What do you need to avoid? Because it's so important for you to understand what works for you. It's not about what other patients are doing, or it's not about what you read online. There's so much research out there that will confuse you. But if you take the time to understand what benefits and what hurts you, it will change your life. It will make you live with the MS much better. To close, I'd like to just give a message to the society and to everybody who's listening today. I've said before, and I'll say it again, MS is a very, very real condition. It is a condition that unfortunately is invisible, but it's very much there with patients. MS patients have so much happening right now in their bodies, right now, this minute. And there is so much for them to think about and so much for them to take into account. Now, I have been an MS patient in the UAE, back home in Bahrain, in the UK, in the US, across Europe, and there is a very clear difference in the support that is given to MS patients in those countries and here. And I really do believe that we can get there because there is enough people and enough of a society to literally form an MS society. Now, what we need to do is empower MS patients with the education that they need to be able to live comfortably with the MS. What we need to do is empower the society with education so that when a new patient is diagnosed with MS, they're fully aware of the condition. They don't need to go on Google and research because they have a place to go to where they can obtain the right kind of information. And they're not stricken with news of the condition. They can actually move on with their lives and embrace the MS. Let this be the start of something new for MS patients everywhere, in the UAE, in the Gulf, and across the Middle East. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Your Royal Highnesses, As-salam alaikum. I learned that on YouTube, Arabic 101. So, I'm amazed by how far 26.2 miles has taken me. That's about 41, 42 kilometers. That's the distance of a marathon. But in my case, it became what I call the distance of a lifetime. I sincerely doubt, in fact, I emphatically know that I would never have taken on running the Boston Marathon had I not been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. And I wanted to see just how hard and how far I could push back at that diagnosis. And I laugh because I wasn't athletic. So when that gun goes off, I see 20,000 rear ends and the view never changes. So I don't want to give you the impression I'm something I'm not. I'm a slow back of the pack runner and I just see everyone's backside. Well, I did push back and I really did it to see if I had what it takes, and that was my only reason. But as the years have gone by and I've been speaking more and more on behalf of the MS patient, I've come to define myself by what I call my 3 S's. Self-discovery, serendipity, and a whole lot of stubbornness. Now, I thought if I'm going to use those words, I should look them up. So I did it the old-fashioned way. I went to the dictionary, and the first word I looked up was stubborn. And it's not the nicest character quality. It said obstinate. But I started to think about it, and I think when your doctor says, oh, you have MS, he probably says, and oh, by the way, you're going to be very stubborn. Because there aren't many people I've met with MS who aren't. And I think it's that stubbornness that keeps us recreating ourselves, banging our head against the wall, trying to do things when we're told we shouldn't, couldn't, or wouldn't. And it really does keep us giving some sort of forward momentum to push back at this disease. So I'm going to take the stubbornness. The second S is serendipity. That means a fortuitous accident. And I know what you're thinking. How can I put a fortuitous accident and MS in the same sentence? But serendipity are the good things that happen in life. Those are the things that come out of nowhere that we get. And I'm still wondering, do I get serendipity because I have MS? Or am I more receptive to good things coming along? So I'm still figuring that out. But serendipity are the good things, and we do deserve it. Then that last S, that's self-discovery. That's how we figure out who and what we are now that we know we have multiple sclerosis. And that's our starting point. Now, the hard part is MS is unpredictable. We find out we have MS, we're standing there in front of that doctor, and the very first place that our mind goes is to somebody we know in our past that we know had MS and doesn't look very good. A neighbor, a friend, a cousin, and that's our reference point, and we think this isn't going to be good. That's what I want to dispel. The face of MS has changed. It's changed dramatically, as we already heard today. I want to be that face of MS. I want to be that person that's on the other side of the doctor's door so that when a person hears they have multiple sclerosis, they can see what multiple sclerosis looks like today. Remember, prior to 1993, there were no therapies. Now, when I started, there were only 3. Now we're up to something like 12 with many, many more on the horizon. As I tell a patient, part of their journey with MS is to find a neurologist that they like, a doctor that they can have a really open conversation with and who understands them and their illness. And the second thing, they need to get on one of these therapies, no question. The nice part is about having so many to choose from is you can switch. If you don't like the one you're on, if it doesn't work for you, you have many, many alternatives now. So that is changing that face of MS. Well, how does serendipity enter into my story? Well, I was diagnosed in 1998, started out with a numb left leg, and at first I ignored it. I had just taken up the sport of running, and I was only running because my girlfriend and I got thrown out of every gym we went to for talking too much, so we had to go outside to run. And in fact, this girl that I run with is about half my height, and she really became a big part of my story. But anyway, I have this numb left leg, and I thought it was from running. And I always thought of my father, because anytime I would go out with my dad and we'd pass some man jogging, my father would inevitably say, now how good can that sport be? Look how miserable that man looks. And I thought, he must be right, I'm already injured. Well, I let it go, and I ignored it. I lost my vision in my left eye, I ignored it. That is part of the symptom of MS, by the way, is to ignore or to not disclose that you have it, to remain very quiet, or to deny. I did that very well. I too woke up paralyzed one day. I ignored it, life came back, I went on and figured out, I did a lot of self-diagnosing. But finally one day I was stepping out of the display window where I used to work, and I fell for no apparent reason. I call that the MS fall. You turn around to see what you fell over, thinking it's a rock or a tree root or maybe a car or a Volkswagen, whatever, there's nothing there. And that's what finally prompted me to get medical help, and like many of you out there, many MRIs, spinal tap, evokes response tests later, it was determined that I had MS. So I take up this sport of running, and suddenly it changes, and instead of thinking about races and getting faster, I started to get satisfaction just from the fact I could still run, because what used to come easily is now much more difficult because of balance, fatigue, and numbness. But in my own way, I'm able to push back, has given everything I do a lot more meaning. So where does this little friend Carol come in? Well, interestingly enough, almost to the day of my diagnosis, Carol was diagnosed with breast cancer, and she's doing awesome. But it was kind of interesting that here we are, both of us with a very life-changing illness, one of those diagnoses that takes your breath away, and our reaction was the same. It really doesn't matter what the disease is, it's how you come to terms with it. Carol was struggling as I was. And what I started to look at is when we get diagnosed, we become immobilized. We don't want to look to the past because now we're mourning what we think we've lost. We don't want to look to the future because it's frighteningly unpredictable. So we get stuck in the here and now. And I call this the lay on the couch, eat bonbons, and watch Oprah, because that's all you think you can do. And now your mother, your aunt, your friends, your husband, your boyfriend, whoever is telling you, don't move. You shouldn't work out with MS, you shouldn't get overheated with MS, you shouldn't exercise. They're online looking it up just like you are. And so that's where you get immobilized. And my mission here is to tell you, you gotta get up off that couch. You can revisit it from time to time, but you just can't stay there. Life is too much fun, there's too much interesting things to do to lay on the couch and feel sorry for yourself. Get out that door and live, and see if you can't push back at your MS. I guarantee you can. Well, out of the clear blue, about a year after my diagnosis, little buddy Carol calls me up, and this was the most weird thing. She said to me, "Why don't we run the Boston Marathon?" And I swear it sounded like she said, "Why don't we go to the mall?" And I'm thinking, okay, that's something I had never thought of doing. And our plan was we weren't going to tell anybody. I wasn't sure if I could run a 5 kilometers, let alone 42. We figured the fewer people who knew, the less embarrassed we would be if we really did decide to go to the mall. And we'd go into the training, we weren't very serious, but if it got too tough, we were quitting. Well, the weeks, the months went by, the miles got more and more, and about 6 weeks before the actual Boston Marathon, we started to realize that this was a lot of work, we were suffering terribly, and we wanted everybody to know about it. And the only way we were going to get what we wanted was to officially enter into the marathon. Our plan before that was just to jump in, and that's called a bandit. They don't get that number, but so who's going to notice 2 middle-aged women? There's 20,000 runners, and we'd have this, we would be feeling good that we finished. But now all of a sudden it changed, the game changed, we wanted one of these official entry. Well, I didn't know that if you aren't fast, you can't get in. Now maybe you have learned that MS and speed don't really go together too well. So I couldn't get in as an official runner, but I found out that you can run for charity. Now you've probably heard of them, Team in Training, leukemia. In the US, there's millions of them. And with a little bit of research, I found out that I could get a number through the National MS Society. Carol was going to go through the breast cancer hospital. I was going to go through MS. We're thinking we're in. What are the odds of all these runners who run for charity actually having the disease? So I call the MS Society up, get a very nice, polite, firm woman on the phone. I said, "My name is Wendy Booker, and I'd like to run the Boston Marathon." "Oh," she said, "we have a waiting list of 150 runners for next year." Now, I figured Carol would get a number. Who's going to turn down somebody with breast cancer? Carol never spoke to a human being. She went through one of those voice messaging systems. Well, you know how you want something, but you didn't know you wanted it till you were told you couldn't have it, and then you wanted it more than you thought you did? We had to get that number. The next day, I called that woman back, same polite woman. I said, "You know, I'm the lady who called you yesterday. Would it help if I told you I have MS?" I got a number within an hour, 18,694. Now, Carol still hadn't spoken to a human, so we came up with what I still think is the best known plan to man. Take the number, tear it in half. Carol would be 186, I'd be the 94. As long as we crossed the finish line together, no one would be the wiser. It's all done by computer, except the MS Society. These numbers are so hard to get that they had a fit that we were thinking of tearing it up. They got Carol a number as well, and we are officially entered into the running of the Boston Marathon. Now, there was one little problem. We were so eager to get these numbers that we didn't look at the contract that we signed. We each signed a contract that we would raise $2,000 apiece. We had 1 month to do it, and just to be sure we were good for our word, they took our MasterCards. Now I'm in trouble. Most races maybe cost $50. $2,000 for a race that I'm not even sure I'm running yet. If it got too rough, I was going to bail out. That put a price on our head, and we panicked. We went to everyone to shake them down for money. And you have to remember, it was easier for me because I have MS, and in that 1 month, I was able to raise $7,000. Now, I felt terrible. Here's Carol, doesn't even have my disease, and now she's going to be out this money as well. Breast cancer and stubbornness go together, too. Stubborn little cuss. She said, I don't want your money. I was going to give her half of mine. She said, I don't want your money, and she on her own raised over $5,000. Now, there's a reason I keep Carol in my story that's not as apparent as it may seem. MS is one of those illnesses that everybody takes on. The people you work with, the people that you play with, at your gym, at your school, at your church, it doesn't matter, your family, they all take on your MS. But there's one voice, there's one person that stands out, and it's that partner in crime, that person you can call in the middle of the night who doesn't think you're crazy. They help you get to your doctor. They listen when you need to talk about therapy, and that's the care partner. That's the person who is there right by your side, because without them, this disease would be a lot more difficult and a lot more lonely. And really, Carol became that care partner for me. She gave life and limb while she was battling her own disease to help me and my MS and get me on my feet. And that's what that caregiver does. And they never get the gratitude that they deserve, so I always want to honor them early on in my talk to say thank you to those who help make our life with MS a little bit easier and a little bit better. Well, my family and friends thought I'd have this marathon out of my system. I'd go back to being a soccer mom and doing all the things with 3 boys that mothers do. And I decided I had to run it again the next year because I couldn't remember crossing the finish line. Well, it was tougher. I went into it with an injury. It was a horrible winter. I live in New England, so there's snow and ice. And Carol really meant it when she got to the top of that famous Heartbreak Hill and said, don't ever ask me to do this again. She hated it. So I decided I was going to get a coach. I was going to become a faster, better runner. I was going to be more qualified. And I found a girl who had won the Philadelphia Marathon, and she was very interested in taking on this middle-aged woman with MS. And she started to coach. Well, she too quickly learned that speed and MS were never going to go together. But she didn't give up on me. And instead of working on speed and the sport, she started to teach me about mental toughness, both as it applies to the sport, but more importantly, as it applies to life. And Courtney taught me about angels. Now, I'm not talking the glowy, fluffy kind, and maybe you have a different word for them here, but I'm talking about somebody who motivates you in a way you never expected. Now, the Boston Marathon route is loaded with angels. There's little kids, and they have orange slices in their hand, and they're all sticky, and they want to touch you, and they want to high-five you. And in the US, we have these motorcycle guys, the Harley-Davidson guys. They're all sticky, and they want to touch you, and they want to high-five you. But that's my point more is that this was a very bad year for me. And I was having a difficult time. I had about 2 miles to go, and I came to the realization I wasn't going to make it. That's why they have medical tents and ambulances and people to help you get to the finish. And I was struggling as to what was I going to do. Was I going to walk? Was I going to crawl? Was I going to get sick? Whatever it wasn't going to be good. And while I was having this moral dilemma, I saw out of the corner of my eye what turned out to be my angel. He came in the form of the largest Boston City police officer I'd ever seen. He's leaning against a pillar like this, looking really bored, like he wished us slower runners would hurry up so he could go home. Well, I saw him, but like I said, I was suffering, and I decided I was done. Right there in the middle of the road, I came to a stop. That policeman came over from where he was standing, put his finger in my face and said, I didn't stand here all day to watch you stumble and fall. Now dig in. I tell people that was my fastest mile. But dig in. That policeman, without ever realizing it, has set me on my path to what it means to have MS. Dig in. Now, I'm not here to talk you into running a marathon. But I am here for the purpose that I formed my foundation. I am here to educate, motivate, and challenge you. I am here to tell you that once you find out you have MS, you can't stay on that couch. You need to get up and live, as I said. And I can make you a promise. If you find something you love to do, and it doesn't have to be physical, maybe it's teaching a kid how to ride a bike or learn a foreign language, play an instrument, take up art, it doesn't matter what it is, it's yours. And when you find that one thing will transform you away from the MS. And during the time your mind is engaged doing it, that's when you get your strength, because you forget you have MS. You're too busy doing what you love. I wish I could take the disease away, but I can't. But I can promise you that for that little bit of time every day that you're doing something that you really, really enjoy, you hear your soul. That gets you out the door. That gets you living your life. The hardest part is finding it, by the way. You might have a couple of false starts, but once you do, you'll know. Because you'll get up in the morning, and instead of taking mental stock, as we all do, like what kind of MS day is this going to be, you'll be thinking about, oh, good, today I get to, and you can fill in the blank of what that is. Well, how do you go from marathons to mountains? The short answer is you open your big mouth, and as you can see, I'm okay doing that. I was one of those people who spent my entire life talking and got into a great deal of trouble doing it in school, so it's funny that I'm now doing it professionally. Anyway, I was invited to speak at the American Neurological Society, and there were 1,800 neurologists. And after I was done speaking, I was invited out to dinner, taken to a restaurant, big round table. All the top who's who in the MS world were there. The top doctors, the top research scientists, the MS Society, public relations companies, and Alan Osmond. Now, you probably know the famous Osmond family, Donny Osmonds. This was his brother. Now, all these doctors are talking about mice models and T1 cells and blood-brain barriers and all the scientific side to MS. I fixated on Alan Osmond. Every 2 minutes, I said, how many kids do you have? How do you guys do Christmas? Now, I'm sure all these doctors are thinking, who invited this woman? But I missed all that. Well, finally, the conversation came around to mountain climbing. Somebody at the table asked me if I'd ever climbed. I proudly named off 2 mountains in the state of New Hampshire that I now know to be foothills. The woman to my left said to me, well, we've had an opportunity come up. There's a gentleman from Boulder, Colorado, who has multiple sclerosis. And he's looking to put the first team of people with MS unguided on Denali. Now, Denali, doesn't that sound hot and tropical? I'm thinking it must be in Hawaii. I'm thinking pina coladas. I'm thinking I just ran the Boston Marathon. How hard can a mountain named Denali be? I am your woman. Now, I didn't hear anything more about it. The dinner ended. It was time to go home. Weeks went by, and my curiosity was killing me. So I finally called this woman back. I said, that Denali you mentioned, where is it? Alaska. I'm thinking, wow, it's going to be really cold. I said, well, that's funny. The only mountain I've ever heard of in Alaska is McKinley. Same mountain. I said, wait a minute. You know those 2 I told you about? I think I was 10. I don't even remember getting to the top, and you're talking about a whole new, I didn't even know the words for it, technical climb. Well, she said, take your time, research it, figure it out. I had a lot to think about. As I said, I have 3 kids. So I got books. I got everything I could possibly read, and the very first book I got was aptly titled Surviving Denali. And the book was broken down according to the chapters, according to the death and mayhem on the mountain. Cerebral edema, pulmonary edema, crevasse falls, frostbite. What's interesting is at the end of every chapter, there's a chart. The chart lists the climber's name, what happened to him, where it happened to him, and how much it cost the federal government to remove his body from the mountain. I couldn't decide, and finally I realized the only person who held the key to this was me. And so once I got quiet and started thinking about it, there were 3 reasons I had to do it. The first, it was personally compelling. Never in my life was I going to be given this opportunity. But the other 2 reasons were even more important. To encourage the newly diagnosed to get on therapy, and to show the world what people with MS are capable of. I want to be on the other side of that door when the doctor diagnoses, and here was this opportunity. So with those 3 in mind, I became the only woman on the 7-man team, MS on Denali. Well, we didn't summit. And you know when you ask a person who climbs these big mountains why they didn't summit, they'll always tell you the weather, because who's going to check? Anyway, we didn't summit, and we didn't deserve to. We were all new to this sport. We were taking on a major peak. and I was crushed. So I decided I had to go back. Now, I was being funded by one of those famous pharmaceutical companies, and I went back and said, send me back, and they said no. They said, we're in the business of saving lives, not killing people by putting them on Denali. But that's when I had my call to action, and I said, you don't understand. This has nothing to do with the mountain. It has everything to do with MS. Just by virtue of what I was doing, mountain climbing is a metaphor for what our life with MS is really like. We can't always get to the top. We have to take a little longer, try a little harder, and dig a little deeper. But eventually, we can succeed. And so with that in mind, I was able to go back, and in June of 2004, became the first person living with multiple sclerosis to summit Mount McKinley. 3 things go with me to the top. I take a Buddha. My eldest child gave me a Buddha, and you know, when you're facing a mountain like Everest or Denali, you want everything stacked in your favor, so Buddha went with me. He's still in the pocket of my coat. Then I take something that keeps me spiritually grounded, and it's a very rare thing to take to the top of a mountain, but I take a man's ashes. His name was John Reed. He was a college professor. He died of prostate cancer in October of 2003, and his widow asked if I would take him to the top of McKinley. And I was so honored to do that for the family. But then I knew I was going to climb the 7 summits, so we took John, put him in 7 envelopes. Then we did more adventures. We put John in more envelopes. John has now been around the world with me, and John has become a big part of my MS mission because his ashes are wrapped in a purple flag. And the purple flag says, come climb with me. And it belongs to each and every one of us with MS. That flag comes out wherever our summit is. That flag comes out at the spot where we say, we have done it. We have made a point. We have gotten off that couch. We are going on with our lives. And that purple flag represents all the people it took to get me there. You know that expression, it takes a village to raise a child? It takes a village to get me to the top of one of these mountains. And that village is my family, my friends, traveling around and meeting all the people with MS are in my backpack with me. Without them, I couldn't do this. So I went on to do 6 of the 7 summits. Very quickly, became that first person with MS to do that. Finally, it was time to face Mount Everest. I made my first attempt in 2009. It takes about 2.5 months. It's an awfully difficult environment. And just short of the Lhotse face, with about 3,000 feet to go, I suffered one of the biggest MS flare-ups I've ever had. Imagine that on the side of Everest. What a place to have that. I suffered from the paralysis and the numbness, and I knew I had to go back down. I tried it again in 2010, and almost at the exact same spot, the exact same thing happened. This time, I realized that I had gotten as high as my MS would allow me to go. And the first thing I did was go back to the United States, lay on the couch, eat bonbons, and watch Oprah. I was done. I go around the country and now the world, and I say to people, you can do this, you just need to dig in. Don't let the MS stop you. And what did it do? It stopped me right in my tracks. In the United States, the MS Society's slogan is join the movement. The movement is used as a word because MS prevents us from moving. And it did it to me. And I was incredulous. And I realized that Everest is a lofty goal, but it was mine. I'd been working on it for 8 years, and the MS took it away. So after 3 months of going through that deep, dark depression, saying, I'm all done, I'm a wash-up, the MS won, I started to think. And I thought, what is Everest? It's the top of the world. But is it the only top? In 2011, with a dog sled team of all things, I became the first person with MS to go to the North Pole. And the only reason I did it was to say I didn't give up on my goal. I just changed how I got there. That's what you can do. Just think about it long enough. I can't get there on Everest, but I got to the top of the world another way. So my mission has grown more and more and more as a result. Now I'm on to a new one. Oh, I did the South Pole too, by the way. If you're going to do the top, you might as well do the bottom. But there was really no other reason to do it except it was there. Anyway, after that, I started to think, you can't leave me alone for too long. The Climb On Foundation I use as a metaphor. Now, I know you look at me and you think, but she looks so good. How bad could her MS be? And first of all, I forgot to explain, I am an orange, as bright an orange as you can find, because this is the color of multiple sclerosis. And that's why I am wearing this orange dress today. That's why you have that orange ribbon, which I'm wearing here. I'll tell you a quick story and then I'll stop. And it's called the Dolphin Darlings, because you can look at me and say, well, she doesn't really must have it all that bad. I was invited to go on a cruise with the MS Foundation, yet another MS organization. It was to the Caribbean. I took a very good friend of mine named Maida. You get to sign up to go on shore trips, and we signed up to swim with the dolphins in Jamaica. Well, the day came, we were offloaded from the boat, and with us were 5 women, all of them in wheelchairs. We get taken down to where the dolphin swim was, get off this little bus. Very difficult terrain to get down to the beach. There was sand and rocks and roots and water. It wasn't easy. We all go down there. These women are great. And when we get down to the beach, the hostess says, go and enjoy our beautiful Caribbean. It's going to be at least 2 hours till you get to swim with the dolphins. Well, my friend Maida and I put out our beach towels. We're looking at this gorgeous water. How difficult is this? And then we realized that those 5 women couldn't get down to the beach. They were stuck in the sand. Fortunately, they had put a tarp over them. It was hot. This is the Caribbean. But all of a sudden, the water didn't look so good to us. Maida was furious. She goes off to tell the management that this was unacceptable. And I go up to start talking to this one woman who was closest to me. Isn't this awesome? We're going to get to swim with the dolphins. Oh, she says, we're not here to swim. We just came to watch. I said, you came all this way to watch people swim with the dolphins? And she said, yeah, we're in wheelchairs. Now, I saw them get off the bus. I said, well, your arms still work. Well, yes. I said, do you know how to swim? Oh, yeah, she was from Tampa, Florida, and before she got in the wheelchair, she was a really good swimmer. I said, I'll tell you what, I'm a good swimmer. I'll get you in a life jacket. I'll help you. We'll get you into the water, and you can swim with the dolphins. She's looking at me like, yeah, right, lady. I don't know who you are, but I know you have MS. And I said, no, really, my friend Maida, she doesn't have MS. She'll get in the water with you. No, she was very uncomfortable with this. I kept pushing. How many times are you going to get this opportunity to go and swim with the dolphins? Promise you, you'll be okay. We'll help you. And I kept going, and I kept telling her to dig in. And all of a sudden, I got to see her do what I asked. And she said, you know what? You're right. I'm going to do it. I'm going to swim with the dolphins. I'm thinking, this is awesome. What I hadn't counted on, the other 4 women. Well, if she's doing it, so are we. Now, I made it out like it was easy. It really wasn't that easy. We got them all into life jackets. 4 of us, Maida and I, helped them down. The 5th girl, a Jamaican gentleman, was nice enough to carry her down. We set them on that wooden platform, and we pushed them in. I don't even remember the dolphins. These women were swimming. The only way you could tell there was any kind of disability was the empty wheelchairs on the shoreline. People were taking pictures. That night when we got back to the ship, that's all everyone talked about was these 5 women. But the best part of the story, about 2 years later, I got an email from Tammy. Her name is Tammy Dunn. She's teaching scuba diving in Tampa. That's what I'm talking about. Isn't that unbelievable? There are millions of stories like that. We have our mountain. Our mountain is MS. What are you going to do with it? Go around it, go through it, get to the top? Doesn't matter. Maybe your mountain is going from your sofa to your mailbox, and it's using your walker instead of your wheelchair. Maybe it takes you 10 times and you only get as far as your kitchen. You know what? It doesn't matter. Not only did you do it, you did it with MS, you're already a winner by virtue of trying. That's what it means to have MS nowadays in 2016. The sky is the limit. You have choices, you have the control, you have the power. Know that you have the permission to live a full and active life. Try anything. As I said, what is the worst that can happen to you? You have to say, I guess I can't do that. If you can't swim, ride a bike. If you can't ride a bike, if you're too far finding that you're having troubles, take yoga. It's an amazing MS experience. As I said, go with your choices, follow your gut, but don't let no be part of your vocabulary. MS can be, for what do they say in the United States? Mystery solved. I do believe in our lifetime we will see that cure. I think it's closer than we think, especially with the stem cell going on all over, all the studies being done. But in the meantime, get off that couch. See what you can do. Do it by baby steps. Don't bite off the whole thing right away. But get out there and climb your own mountain. The view from the top is incredible. Wait, I have one more sentence to say to you. Sukaran Jazilan. Thank you.
other than coming to the UAE, Wendy, where is your next adventure?
I was given the opportunity to return to Alaska starting in next September to train for the Iditarod. That's a 1,049-mile dog sled race from Anchorage to Nome to highlight the original serum run to save lives from diphtheria back in the 1920s. We're doing an educational film around this run called 1,049 Stories, and it's the stories and faces of MS, not just mine. It's about people like you guys, all of you, the stories that make us keep on going, another way to get behind that door so that when a doctor diagnoses you, we want this film to be given to every newly diagnosed patient so that they can see the possibilities and the probabilities. So I'll be returning to Alaska. It takes 2 years to train with the hopes of running Iditarod with 16 dogs about the unpredictability, the things around every corner, both for MS, with MS, and to share that with 1,049 stories. So that's what's next.
Very good. I'm exhausted just listening to it. And Maha, what are some dreams what is the dream and what is your vision for what you hope to do and what you hope to change in the UAE?
I think for me, because I'm from here and I grew up here and I will always have an allegiance to the Middle East, one thing I would really like to do is just empower the MS patients. I think my vision for the future is that every patient who is newly diagnosed with MS is given like an MS pack. So something that they can take with them home that will explain to them what they need to understand, that will explain to them all the medications available, what the side effects of these medications are, lifestyle changes that they should incorporate, and that they have a place to go so that they can ask their questions and the community can really come together. I really believe that that can happen.
I do too. No, I think that that's a fantastic dream. I have some questions that were given to me, to Dr. Nicoline. What are 3 take-home tips that you would give to MS patients in the audience? And also, equally important, do you have any tips for caregivers, for family members, spouses, and children, and people who are a part of your close family? And so I think after hearing my fellow speakers today, I think that, your attitude is the most important and how you look at your condition. And I've had patients who have a lot of disability, who are in wheelchairs, and yet they are happy with the way their life is going. And then I've also had patients who have no disability at all, who are doing very well, but inside themselves they feel sick. They feel like they are struggling when they have, really very little disability. And so I think your attitude is very important. And then I just want to say also that when people talk about disability, there are many, many, many things that make up disability. And I think Maha's 4th rule, if I remember it correctly, was to exercise. So there are many people who say, I have this disability because of my MS, because of the nerves, the nervous system is affected. But that is not the only thing that can cause difficulty. Your heart, how strong is your heart? Do you exercise aerobically? How strong are your muscles? Do you let your muscles get weak? Do you let them atrophy away because you don't make an effort to make them strong? Your bones and your muscles, your heart, all of these different things can all contribute to the big picture. So there are many, many, many ways that you can improve your health and maximize your health, and essentially let these other parts of your body compensate for what is missing in the nervous system. And then finally, to start medicine early and to eat well. And then the caregivers, which I think is an equally important part. I think that the tip that I can give to people who support people who have MS is patience, and to find other people in your position. So when you share stories, you gain strength, and I think finding other people who are in your position is a tremendous source of strength for you. Okay. All right, I'm going to go to Wendy again. Do you have flare-ups or new symptoms? And if so, what do you do?
I do have flare-ups. My biggest problem is vertigo or dizziness. It always happens at the most inopportune time, but I guess that's MS. I do end up every probably 2 years or so going into the doctor and having a IV with salumedrol, which is a steroid. It is not a cure, it is a symptom management, and it reduces the inflammation. And after that, I'm usually good to go again. So I try to recognize when I am having a flare-up. As you can tell, it's very hard to get me to slow down and stop. So often it takes me feeling pretty badly before I recognize it as a flare-up. And then I try just to go back on to living and do another marathon or something crazy. I'm taking up stand-up paddleboarding too. That's a new one for me. Just because we can try it, why not? So I do get them, but yes, I try to manage them as best I can.
Okay, very good. So I have some wonderful questions here, and so I'm going to put my questions in the back, and I'm going to answer all of these fantastic questions here. So this is one, I think, for both of you in particular. So how can we avoid the fear of having an episode during the day? How do we handle the fear of having an episode? And I think you both talked about different situations.
A true flare-up doesn't come on like a light switch. It doesn't stop you in your tracks, seriously. It's very slow. You can start to feel different. The hard part is, and even to this day, and I'm almost 20 years diagnosed, you can't blame MS on everything. I used to giggle and say, my eyelashes hurt, it must be MS. Or I caught a cold. No, it's just a cold. It's not because of MS. Part of that's getting your confidence back in your body and listening to your body. And so you will know when you are truly having a flare-up because you can't really shake it and it sort of becomes more and more prevalent in your world. Hopefully, if you're on a therapy, you won't get many of them. You'll be able to stay where you are. I was telling these ladies that I have been speaking since 2000, and when I first started public speaking, the audience, maybe 200 people, not quite a third of them were quite debilitated, needing walking aids, using wheelchairs. You could see that they had some severe disease progression, and this was in the early years of the therapies. Today, when I go and speak, very few people are requiring that. That's a testament and a testimonial to how effective these therapies are. So that's why when you find out you have MS, you don't want to keep it quiet. You need to get to that doctor and get on therapy so that you can come climb a mountain with me.
The fear, I think, is actually very important because the fear is what keeps you attuned to what is happening with your body. So in the initial couple of years of my diagnosis, I didn't really understand the MS very well, and I hid it from everybody. I hid it from my boss, I hid it from my friends. I think standing on a stage speaking about it at that point in my life would have been my worst nightmare. But getting over the fear comes with understanding what your MS does and understanding things like, you know, when you're driving and it's hot, are my eyes blurry because of the MS, or am I just low on sugar, you know? And that, I think the fear is actually something that you don't have to overcome. It's something that patients need to embrace because that's what makes you listen to your body and that's what makes you attune to the various symptoms that can flare up at any point.
Also, MS is not like a seizure. It's not like epilepsy where I can be sitting here for 1 minute and the next minute, you know, I'm going to have an attack. So MS doesn't work like that. For us to define an attack from a medical perspective, it needs to be consistent and there and present for 24 hours. Okay, so it's not going to happen like that. And when people are first diagnosed, they're very, very fearful. They don't know what is normal anymore. They have a little bit of feeling in their pinky and they think, is this MS? Am I going to, you know, am I having an attack? Is this it? And it's because you don't know your body anymore. You can't rely on what you're used to in understanding what you feel. And so I always tell my patients that the first year is the hardest because you have to relearn your body again. You have to learn what is important and what is not important. And I think that just comes with, you know, with time, essentially. So that was a good question. All right. The next question. I've been diagnosed 3 months ago. I am very positive and working on myself, but I have 3 small children. How can I make them understand and adapt to my new lifestyle? It is heartbreaking for me, especially when they want to go to the beach. How can I deal with my children? So you have 3 children,
I have 3
right?
children. That's hard. I believe in telling them, and actually you can get them to help you. And doing things like picking up the laundry, make a game out of it. Make them aware, though, that this is something you have, and you need them, and you need their time and attention, and they'll become your biggest advocates. As they grow up, mine are now grown, they kind of keep a watchful eye out on Mom, because I did start them when they were young, learning about MS. The part about going to the beach, here too, and now you guys, it's very hot here, so there's hot and then there's hot. Not all people are affected by the heat. Some people also have problems with the cold. This is something you are going to have to learn. It's such an individual thing. You might be able to go to the beach and be fine. Before they came out with MRI, which is how they make the diagnosis, as late as the 80s, they used to put people in hot tubs to see if they got symptomatic and if they had a flare-up. And that's one of the ways that they made, which seems funny to me that it was that recent, but that's how they made the determination, one of the ways to test for MS. You can try the beach. Just be aware that you may have to pack up the kids. They're going to leave the beach kicking and screaming if it doesn't work. Find out other alternatives. Go early in the morning to the beach. Go late in the afternoon to the beach. You have to do things that will work, but you bring them into it. Instead of making them feel they're punished or that this is their lot to carry in life, make it a more positive thing, because they'll end up learning as adults that they can handle anything too, just by following you.
There are also vests that you can buy and things that you can wear under your clothes that are cooling vests. So if you know that you're going to be somewhere outside, you can buy a cooling vest that keeps your body, your core temperature cold while you're outside. So there are a lot of small little things you can do to change that. And also, I think the example that you set for your children is extremely important. So we have a colleague at Johns Hopkins. He's one of the big people in our MS group at Johns Hopkins. His name is Dr. Scott Newsom, and he was raised by a single mother who had MS. And he saw, as he grew up, he saw how she struggled, and he saw the struggles that she had, and he is now one of the top leaders in MS. He is an MS doctor, and he is a phenomenal physician. So keep in mind that your children will also be adults one day, and the example that you set for them, you can change other people's lives through your children. So Scott Newsom has a very inspiring story.
If I can just add to that, I'm not in the same boat, and I think it's incredible that you're being this brave and this positive 3 months into your diagnosis. I know I handle it differently in the initial 3 months, but one thing that I do, because I live here, I go to the beach a lot in the winter and in the early stages of summer. I definitely don't go right now. When it does start getting a little bit hotter and people are just starting to go out to the beach, I do my best to stay in the water, because I find that actually that cools me. I take a big bottle of just ice from the freezer, and I drink that throughout the day. I stay a certain number of hours. I don't stay there from morning till night, but if you go at a certain time of the day, maybe that's something that you can incorporate into the early stages of the summer, maybe not right now.
Very good. So there's many small little adaptations that you can make that make it possible. So this is another question here. Dr. Nicoline, do you believe in alternative medicine in healing MS? More specifically, do you believe that food can be used as a powerful in healing such a disease? And do you suggest diet as a way of dealing with MS? So absolutely, diet is important, no question. Alternative therapies as well. Many of my patients use alternative medicine, and I think we had an excellent talk on nutrition, and we know that vitamin D actually does have a relationship with attacks. So we know that people who have lower vitamin D levels are more likely to have enhancing lesions on MRI, and people with low vitamin D can also have increased frequency of attacks. So there's a lot of information in food and the diet, and there's more and more scientific evidence coming that what you eat affects the immune system in the stomach. So the gut is a very large immune system. And so this is all coming out now. Do I recommend only diet to control the disease? No. And the reason for that is studies have looked at that. And we know that only diet is not going to keep your disease quiet. So I don't recommend that. I do recommend immunomodulatory therapy, and then absolutely diet in addition to that.
If I can interrupt, there's a doctor from the United States in Colorado named Alan Bowling, like bowling the game. And he's written a very, very good book about alternative therapies. He is an MS doctor. Alternative therapies for MS. So there's literature out there. You can get it on Amazon. And you can read on and he does combine traditional and holistic approach as well as what we have today available to us.
And then one other question is, have I heard about Dr. Terry Walls, who has healed herself? I haven't heard about her. And when I hear that people have healed themselves, I'm very interested to talk about it. You know, we all want to heal this. We all want to stop this disease. The challenges with people who say that they have been healed is that relapsing remitting is a relapsing remitting disease. That's why it's called relapsing remitting. And you'll be normal, and then you'll have an attack, and then the natural progression of the disease is to get better. And then you're normal for a long time. Sometimes it's a year, sometimes it's 20 years. So everybody continues to be normal for a while until the next attack happens. And so if I give you anything after that first attack, if I give you green laser light therapy, or I can choose anything at all, a lot of patients will be stable for years, for decades even. But that's not necessarily because of the treatment. It's just because that's the natural course of the disease. So when I hear people who have healed themselves through various methods, I'm glad they're doing well, but I wonder when the next attack is. So I don't, but I believe in the evidence of immuno-based therapies.
If I can just add to that, Doctor, I actually have Dr. Terry Walhall's book. It was bought to me by a friend who's very dear to me, and I do incorporate elements of what she says in her book in my everyday life. So in terms of the foods that I eat and the foods I try to avoid, I do incorporate it, but like I said, I am on medication, and I think I will probably be on it for a long time, but I do think that the two together can complement each other.
Okay, unfortunately, I've been told we have to stop, and we have some wonderful questions. I'm just going to go very briefly through the last two questions. One is, can we diagnose MS without the MRI? So I showed in my first slide this 1,000 years ago, we could identify patients from their clinical attacks that this isn't likely MS. And until we had MRIs, we diagnosed the disease clinically. But what MRIs help us with is MRIs help us monitor the disease. So when we have patients on therapy, sometimes you can have attacks and you don't even know that you're having an attack because the brain is such a big organ and there's a lot of redundancy. And so we do every year we do an MRI to find out if the medicine is effective and is keeping the disease quiet. For people who are claustrophobic, you can take sedation, you can take medication which quiets you down. Open MRIs are not ideal because they don't give as clear a picture, but if they're the only thing that's tolerated, absolutely, an open MRI is better than no MRI. So MRIs are an incredible tool for us to help monitor and to follow the disease. This is lovely from me. How can we join the MS Research Center? So research is a very exciting part, and I'm more than happy to discuss projects that we're looking forward to starting. And finally, why is MS medicine so expensive? So MS medicines are very expensive because it takes sometimes 10 to 15 years to go through all the safety trials, all the research trials. People put a lot of money into research, and they put tens of thousands of dollars into clinical trials to make sure that these medicines work in human beings and that they are safe in human beings. And so millions and millions and millions of dollars are invested by pharmaceutical companies to bringing a drug to the market. And those that can't afford it, where can we go? So it's a difficult question, and we do struggle with that question. If nothing else, vitamin D, high levels of vitamin D is the best thing that you can do. You can buy that in any pharmacy. But, we struggle with that all over the world, is how do we get to pay for our medicines? Okay. Well, sorry, we have to end. But thank you for these wonderful questions.
So